As of June 13, 2026, the United States military confirmed the downing of several Iranian drones in the region, a development that complicates ongoing high-stakes negotiations aimed at de-escalating tensions and securing the reopening of one of the world's most critical maritime choke points. Presenting the world with a rare and precarious diplomatic paradox, two nations simultaneously exchanging finalized terms for a peace agreement while engaging in active, albeit limited, combat. Right now, at this very hour, the world is holding its breath across two separate war zones, one in the scorched deserts and choked shipping lanes of the Middle East, and one in the mud-soaked trenches and burning cities of Eastern Europe. And in both theaters, the line between war and peace has never been thinner or more explosive, and what happens in the next 48 hours could reshape the global order for decades to come. So let's start where the stakes are most immediate, where steel meets seawater in the most strategically vital stretch of ocean on the planet, the Strait of Hormuz. Because the United States said it downed multiple Iranian drones targeting commercial ships in the Strait of Hormuz early Saturday, just hours after both sides said a deal to end the Middle East war was closer than ever. And that contradiction, shooting down drones while negotiating peace, tells you everything you need to know about the knife's edge the entire Middle East is balanced on right now. Because the interception came after weeks of halting talks between Tehran and Washington, mediated by Pakistan, that have been marked by threats and exchanges of fire despite a fragile truce agreed in April. And U.S. Central Command posted on social media that Iran had launched multiple one-way attack drones in an attempt to strike commercial ships transiting the Strait of Hormuz, with American forces downing all of them in recent hours as traffic flow through the strait continued unimpeded. And CENTCOM added that the international trade corridor remains open for transit. But make no mistake, that statement is a military declaration wrapped in diplomatic language, because the U.S. military shot down two Iranian drones that were targeting vessels in the Strait of Hormuz just the night before, according to a U.S. defense official, even as an agreement between the U.S. and Iran that could lead to an end to the war appeared to be materializing. And what makes this moment so extraordinary, so historically unprecedented, is the simultaneous occurrence of combat and diplomacy, of missiles and memorandums, of soldiers and signatories all moving in real time. Because what a top Iranian official was saying was that a memorandum of understanding between Tehran and Washington has never been closer, with Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi cautioning against speculation about the agreement, while Benjamin Netanyahu stated that as long as he is Prime Minister of Israel, Iran will not have nuclear weapons, drawing the sharpest possible line around what any final deal can and cannot include. And yet even that red line is being tested, because Pakistani Prime Minister Shehbaz Sharif said that Islamabad's mediators believed a final text of an agreement to end the Middle East war had been reached, and that announcement sent shockwaves through every foreign ministry and military command center from Washington to Tel Aviv to Tehran, because it suggests that somewhere in the back channels of Islamabad, negotiators have put pen to paper on terms that could formally end a war that began with one of the most seismic military events of the 21st century, when on February 28, 2026, Israel and the United States began a series of strikes against Iran, saying they aimed to induce regime change and target its nuclear and ballistic missile program, killing Iran's supreme leader Ali Khamenei in the strikes, with Iran appointing Khamenei's son as his successor and launching a series of counterstrikes against Israel, U.S. military bases in the region, and military and civilian locations in Arab states, while also closing the Strait of Hormuz, a major global trade route for goods including fuel and gas. And from that catastrophic opening act, the world descended into the most dangerous military confrontation since the Cold War. But now, with Pakistan's mediation reaching what appears to be a breakthrough, the question hanging over every war room and trading floor on the planet is whether this deal will actually hold. Because accounts of the draft proposal from Western, Pakistani, and Iranian sources pointed to terms that could favor Iran, drawing criticism from Trump, who dismissed the reports reports as inaccurate, while the proposals broadly offered Tehran much of what it has sought, with Trump appearing to secure little beyond the reopening of the strait, which Iran closed after the U.S. and Israel strikes in February, with Araghchi saying Iran would, along with Oman, retain control of traffic through the strait, which before the war handled 1/5 of the world's oil and gas supply, and adding that our sword will always hang over the Strait of Hormuz, which is not the language of a defeated nation. It is the language of a regime that believes, rightly or wrongly, that it has survived the most powerful military alliance in history and emerged with leverage intact. And that belief is shaping every term of every negotiation happening right now, because Iranian Foreign Minister Araghchi said on state television that Iran is the winner of the war with the U.S., and hours after those remarks, U.S. forces shot down multiple Iranian one-way attack drones heading toward the Strait of Hormuz, which means Tehran is simultaneously declaring victory at the negotiating table and continuing to probe American defenses in the strait, a dual-track strategy that is either brilliant geopolitical maneuvering or a catastrophic miscalculation that could blow the entire deal apart before the ink is dry. And the stakes of that miscalculation are staggering, because India's foreign minister called his U.S. counterpart in a strong protest after U.S. strikes hit 3 mainly Indian-crewed merchant ships off the coast of Oman, killing 3 sailors as part of the American blockade of Iranian ports, which means the humanitarian and diplomatic cost of this conflict is now spreading beyond the primary combatants and dragging in South Asian nations whose economic arteries run through the Gulf Persian. And every day the strait remains militarily contested. Every day Iranian drones probe American defenses. Every day a merchant captain has to decide whether to risk his crew and cargo through a waterway that has become a live fire zone. Is another day the global economy bleeds. Oil markets spike, supply chains fracture, inflation pressure builds in households from Houston to Hamburg, and that economic countdown clock is precisely why the Islamabad framework matters so much, because the motive to end the crisis includes reopening the Strait of Hormuz and ensuring long-term peace and stability in the Middle East, and the proposed outcome envisions the United States and Iran agreeing on a temporary ceasefire, though earlier Islamabad talks failed to reach an agreement and a U.S. naval blockade of Iran followed, and the ghost of that April failure haunts every current negotiation because both sides have already sat at the table once and walked away, which means trust is essentially zero, verification mechanisms are disputed, and the military postures on both sides remain fully combat ready, even as diplomats trade final draft language. And nowhere is that tension more visible than in the strait itself, where on March 19, 2026, the United States began an aerial campaign against Iranian targets to reopen the Strait of Hormuz, following its closure by Iran, announcing the operation as part of a plan to reopen the passage to international shipping by destroying Iranian naval vessels and drones targeting shipping in the strait, with Israel also assassinating the Iranian naval officer overseeing the blockade. And yet, despite that campaign, despite the blockade, despite the elimination of Iran's Hormuz commander, Iran is still launching drones at commercial ships today on June 13, 2026.
Which means either the campaign has failed to achieve its core military objective, or Iran is conducting these strikes precisely to maintain leverage at the negotiating table, using each intercepted drone as a reminder that the strait can be closed again the moment Washington does not deliver on its commitments. And that is the terrifying geometry of this situation, a deal that is simultaneously imminent and fragile, with military action continuing on both sides even as signatures are reportedly being prepared. And now let us turn east, to the frozen and burning front lines of Eastern Europe, where a different kind of war is grinding toward a different kind of milestone. Because while the Middle East hangs on the question of whether a peace deal will materialize in hours, Ukraine and Russia are locked in a war where no such deal is anywhere on the horizon. And instead, what is emerging is a profound transformation in the nature of warfare itself. Because since the beginning of 2026, Ukrainian drone operators have neutralized 12,500 more Russian personnel than Russia has recruited into its armed forces over the same period, according to Ukraine's commander-in-chief Oleksandr Syrskyi on June 11th, who stressed that Ukraine is increasingly competitive in what he described as a technological contest defined by innovation and production capacity. And that statistic is not just a battlefield data point, it is a declaration that Ukraine has found a way to defeat Russian attrition with Ukrainian innovation, that the meat grinder tactics Putin deployed to grind Ukraine down have been turned against Russia itself, because Ukrainian forces now hold a 1.5-to-1 advantage over Russia in FPV drone operations, with this gap continuing to widen in Ukraine's favor in recent months. And Ukrainian unmanned systems units struck nearly 180,000 verified enemy targets in May alone, marking a 12.7% increase, which means in a single month, Ukraine's drone forces struck nearly 200,000 individual Russian targets, vehicles, command posts, supply depots, troop concentrations, artillery positions, at a rate and scale that no air force or missile program in history has ever matched. And this is happening in a country that 4 years ago had no dedicated drone branch at all, a country that built the world's first independent unmanned systems forces from scratch while simultaneously fighting a full-scale invasion. And the operational results of that innovation are now visible on the front lines in Donetsk, where, according to an assessment by the Institute for the Study of War published on June 9th, Ukrainian troops have made progress in 2 sectors of the front line, near Borova in the Kharkiv region and in the Kostiantynivka-Druzhkivka tactical area of the Donetsk region, with additional advances recorded in northwestern Chasiv Yar and northeast of Kostiantynivka. And ISW also noted Ukrainian movement in both eastern and western parts of Kostiantynivka, in areas where Russian sources had previously claimed a presence, which is strategically significant because Kostiantynivka is a critical logistics and supply hub in central Donetsk, and Russian penetration there had been projected to threaten Kramatorsk and the entire Ukrainian defensive depth in the North Donetsk corridor. But Ukraine is not only holding, it is pushing back, and it is doing so while simultaneously absorbing one of the most sustained Russian bombardment campaigns of the entire war. Because on the morning of June 12th, Russian troops launched a massive artillery strike on Sumy using long-range artillery, resulting in 6 people being wounded and 8 hits recorded in the eastern part of the city, while a logistics operator's terminal in Zaporizhia was damaged in a Russian drone attack. And on the afternoon of June 12th, Russian troops launched a missile strike on a solar power plant in the southern Odessa region, which means Russia is systematically attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure, civilian logistics, and population centers simultaneously, a multi-vector terror campaign designed to destroy civilian morale, cripple economic production, and force Ukraine's Western partners to question the sustainability of their support, because every destroyed solar panel, every damaged warehouse, every wounded civilian in Sumy is a message from Moscow to Kyiv and to Washington. The cost of this war will keep rising. And Russian troops attacked Mykolaiv with Shahed drones, injuring a man, and a Russian drone struck a dormitory building in Sumy, while in the Poltava region, a building belonging to an industrial enterprise caught fire following a Russian drone strike on the night of June 12th. And Mykolaiv is being hit repeatedly now, not because it has frontline military significance, but because it's a port city, a gateway, a symbol of southern Ukrainian resistance that Russia has been trying to break since the very first weeks of the invasion. And the fact that Shahed drones are still raining down on its streets 4 years later tells you everything about the state of this war. Neither side is close to breaking the other. Both sides are causing enormous damage, and the civilians caught in the middle are paying the highest possible price. And yet, despite all of this destruction, despite the missiles and drones and artillery,
Total combat losses among Russian troops since the start of the full-scale invasion from February 24, 2022 to June 12, 2026 amount to approximately 1,380,120, including 1,300 over the past 24 hours alone. And that number, 1,380,000 Russian soldiers killed, wounded, or captured, is a figure that staggers the imagination, a figure that would have seemed apocalyptically impossible when this war began. A figure that represents the complete destruction of the Russian military as it existed before 2022, replaced now by a conscript force supplemented by North Korean troops and convicts pulled from prisons. And yet,
Russia keeps fighting, keeps advancing slowly, keeps absorbing these losses, because Vladimir Putin has concluded that time is on his side, that Western support will eventually fracture, that Ukraine will eventually exhaust itself, that the arithmetic of manpower and territory will eventually bend in Moscow's favor. And the question Ukraine's commanders, Zelensky's government, and NATO's planners are racing to answer is whether drone supremacy can defeat that arithmetic before exhaustion sets in. And Russia has shifted its Donetsk offensive towards Kostiantynivka after the Slavyansk push stalled, according to ISW, while Ukrainian drones neutralized more Russian troops than Russia recruited, which means the Russian offensive in the Donetsk region is visibly struggling to achieve breakthrough that its previous attempt to storm Slavyansk, a city of symbolic and strategic enormity, the place where this war effectively began with Russian-backed separatists in 2014, has stalled, and Moscow is now redirecting its armored columns towards Kostiantynivka instead, searching for the weak point in Ukraine's defensive line that will allow the kind of operational breakthrough that has eluded Russian commanders for 4 years. But Ukraine's drone forces are making that search extraordinarily costly, because every Russian column moving through Donetsk's fields and tree lines is now tracked, targeted, and struck by FPV drones operating in swarms, with Ukrainian operators holding a confirmed 1.5-to-1 advantage in the air. And the tempo of Ukrainian deep strikes inside Russia itself is also accelerating, because Ukraine's offensive reach deep inside Russia only seems to be increasing in 2026, with strikes hitting refineries, fuel depots, ammunition storage, and military infrastructure hundreds of kilometers from the front line, compressing Russia's logistical depth and forcing Moscow to divert air defense assets from the front to protect its own interior, which creates the exact vulnerabilities at the point of contact that Ukraine's frontline drone operators are now exploiting in Donetsk and Kharkiv. And while these two wars, the Middle East standoff and the Eastern European grind, appear to be separate conflicts with separate actors and separate dynamics, they are in fact deeply interconnected, because every barrel of oil that flows or fails to flow through the Strait of Hormuz affects the energy revenues that European nations depend on to fund their defense budgets. Every dollar that goes to rebuilding the Middle East is a dollar not going to rebuild Ukraine, and every signal of American military resolve or restraint in the Persian Gulf is read in Moscow as a data point about how far Washington will go to defend a partner under fire. And right now, Washington is simultaneously shooting down Iranian attack drones flying towards the Strait of Hormuz in another flare-up of violence, even as Washington and Tehran were suggesting a peace deal was imminent, with Iran launching multiple one-way attack drones in an attempt to strike commercial ships transiting the strait. And this simultaneity, peace imminent, drones incoming, is the defining condition of our current world, a world where wars do not end cleanly, where negotiations and combat coexist, where the same government that signs a memorandum of understanding also launches an attack drone at a merchant vessel 4 hours later. And in Ukraine, the same dynamic applies. No peace talks, no ceasefire, just the daily grind of artillery and drones and frontline advances measured in meters and paid for in lives, with Ukrainian military personnel set to receive increased pay in June 2026, amounting to at least 30,000 hryvnias for rear echelon positions and an average of 300,000 hryvnias for frontline infantry soldiers, which tells you something profound about the state of this war. Ukraine is not crumbling, it is professionalizing, investing in its soldiers, betting on human capital and technological edge to offset Russia's manpower advantage. And the results are visible in the data. More Russian losses per day, more Russian targets struck per month, more Russian advances stalled or reversed. And the world needs to understand that what is happening on these two fronts right now is not the continuation of old conflicts. It is the forge in which the new rules of the 21st century are being written, where drones have replaced tank columns as the decisive weapon, where Iran can declare victory against the United States while simultaneously signing a peace deal, where Ukraine can neutralize more Russian soldiers than Moscow can recruit while absorbing daily missile strikes on its cities, where the old certainties of of military power and diplomatic leverage have been scrambled beyond recognition, and the only thing that is certain, the only conclusion that holds across both theaters, is that the next 24 to 48 hours will be decisive, that what happens in the Strait of Hormuz this weekend and what happens in the fields of Donetsk this weekend will send signals that reverberate through the global order for years. And you are watching it happen, right here, right now.